Let's move on to the Capitals, guys, a team that's on the other end of the playoff spectrum. With 4 games remaining, they're 4 points behind Columbus. There's a couple teams in between them, Toronto and New Jersey. If, assuming the Caps miss the playoffs, Mr. Steinberg, who deserves more blame, George McPhee or Adam Oates?
This is interesting. I was kind of curious where these guys are going to go. I would fall pretty much squarely on George McPhee because George McPhee is responsible for Adam Oates. In addition to being responsible for this roster, he's responsible for this coach, and he has a history of hiring first-time head coaches, guys who maybe don't have quite the experience level. It worked out well with Boudreau, but there was the Bruce Cassidy failure, and this Oates thing sure seems to be a failure. I don't see how the responsibility ultimately for missing the playoffs falls on anyone but McPhee. That doesn't mean that he doesn't get credit for what they've done the past few years. He certainly does. But I think for this year, for this failure, for the defense falling apart, for the offense not having enough, for Adam Oates having to put Ovechkin with Beagle and kind of having his lines make no sense for much of the last few weeks, I think it all goes back to McPhee, really. And I think if they make a change at the GM spot, they probably do make a change at the coaching spot too, because the new guy would want to hire his own guy. But I think that whether or not Oates survives the season, I think that McPhee's the guy that takes the most of the blame.
Mike, your thoughts?
It's sort of like out with, what does the baby go out with the bathwater?
Mm-hmm.
They probably go out together. If in fact, it'd still be interesting to me if Ted Leonsis has the guts to actually hire and fire a general manager. He hasn't done either yet. He has basically kept the people that have been there that he had when he bought the franchises. And I always say he hires, he doesn't hire GMs, he hires Supreme Court justices. But I got to think that with everything that's happened, you have to do something with George McPhee. It's probably one of the last cards you could play with your fan base, which is almost flabbergasted at this point. They don't even, they're sort of like, we got these exciting players. What are we doing? We're not even the team we were 3 years ago. Adam Oates, I've been told outside the organization, not inside the organization, is going to be gone no matter what. And that's from people who talk to people inside the organization. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do know that at some point, I don't know if you guys saw, there's like friction between McPhee and Oates now. They're saying different things about what's going on with the roster and what's going on with the team and how things are being used. And so I think right now is a critical time where McPhee's trying to distance himself from Oates, and I don't think, like Dan said, I don't think he can. He's the guy who hired him.
That's an interesting point. That was going to be my next question, is who's the more likely to be fired at the end of the season? LeVar, I'm curious, coming off of Mike's point, does Leonsis have a choice, given the collective din among the fans and just complete, utter distaste and distrust of how this team has been put together with all the disappointments in the past?
I'll say this. I don't think that it's 100% cut and dry the way that it was kind of just explained. I think if you look at some of the success that this team has had throughout the years, you also got to look at the level of talent that they were playing against at those point in times. That's worth taking a look at. They did have a harder way to go this year with the realignment. When I look at what Boudreau was able to get out of this group of guys, at least the ones that are still here, there was a lot of offensive production. Then you see there's this whole shift in how things are done, and then it's more defensively. Again, I think that the main issue, in my opinion, just someone who has watched the team and has learned about the game, I think that they're not physical enough to be a contending team. It's too much finesse. You don't have enough physicality with what it is that you're bringing to the table. But I also believe that they have not been able to figure out the way that teams have played against them ever since that playoff game against Montreal. And for that, I think now, because you've invested so much money and you've invested so much kind of publicity and so much push.
Let's add a minute to the clock. We're doing good on time so far.
You've put so much in terms of pushing Ovechkin and Mike Green and Nicholas Backstrom that it's not so simple to just say the GM can get rid of these players. You have to try to find someone that you feel can actually utilize these assets that this team has. And for that, I think that it does have to fall more on the coach than it does the GM, because in reality, you want to sell tickets, and you bring in a coach that has a healthy affinity from the fan base. He has a healthy respect from the players. people talk about how smart he is and his mental prowess and what he brings to the table and the success he had before he came here, even though he wasn't a head coach. You look at what George McPhee does, you say to yourself, if you can make sense of why George McPhee made that decision, which I think coming into it, when Oates was brought in, everybody was on the same accord that it made sense to bring this type of a guy in. He's a player's coach. He's smart. He'll coach the way that he played, and that just hasn't been the case. And for that, I think it does fall more on the coach, more so than on the GM.
Some more on us.
We'll gobbled up that entire extra minute.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. I had a follow-up question for you guys, but we'll save that to next week. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the players and how you break up the core potentially.
Yeah, there's going to be quite a deconstruction of everything that happened.
There will, and we'll talk about that next week on the show, so tune in for that.